And now I have the pleasure of introducing today's presenters. Next slide. Tonya Bartell is currently an associate professor of mathematics education in the College of Education at Michigan State University and serves as the associate director of elementary programs. She began teaching 25 years ago as a high school math teacher, including 3 years as a founding teacher in an alternative high school to support students labeled as not succeeding by the system. Courtney Koestler is the director of the Ohio Center for Equity in Mathematics and Science as an associate professor of instruction in the Patton College of Education at Ohio University. They began teaching in public elementary and middle schools as a classroom teacher in 1998, went on to serve as a K-5 math coach, and then started working at the university-based teacher educator as a university-based educator and researcher. Courtney is currently teaching 3rd grade with a partner teacher in Southeast Ohio. Jennifer Ward is currently an assistant professor of elementary and early childhood mathematics education, an elementary undergraduate program coordinator at Kennesaw State University. During her PhD program, much of her work centered around her experience as an early childhood teacher designing and teaching math for social justice lessons with children ages 3 to 8. And Ava Thanheiser is a professor of mathematics education at Portland State University in Oregon, where she teaches mathematics content courses for elementary and middle school teachers. She is the lead investigator on 2 National Science Foundation grants, one to connect elementary mathematics to the world and another to focus on anti-bias mathematics education at the K-12 level. And now I have the pleasure of turning our presentation over to Tonya, Courtney, Jennifer, and Ava.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I want to start with our agenda. If we can go to the next slide, just to give a brief overview of what we're going to do today. So you see the 3 newer book and one a little bit older book on the left here. And we want to start by talking about the importance of learning about the students and your audience that you're working with. Then we're going to talk about why math. Then we're going to talk about the learning for social justice standards, and then adapting and creating lessons. And we'll close with how to connect with each other. So we're going to go to the next slide, and we're going to give you 5 minutes to scan in quickly or click the link, and I'll put it in the chat to the link. To complete a quick survey. We're going to use this survey to create some Wordles so we kind of know who we are. And if you want to share your email, we will connect you all with each other afterwards so that you can collaborate if you like. So will you start the 5-minute timer? After you're done with the survey, you can continue introducing yourselves in the chat. And one activity we like is to just choose a number that tells us something about you, and then share why you chose that number.
Ava, the QR code didn't work, I don't think.
I'm getting the link. All right, I put the link in there. I see the answers coming in, so that's cool. I'm also loving reading the numbers. We have about 50 more seconds to wrap up the survey. And then if you have time, add some stuff in the chat. So as we're running out of time, I just want to do a quick summary from reading the numbers in that chat. I've had a really good chance to learn quite a bit about all of you. And I've done this activity multiple times in person in first grade, where I learned about how many cousins everybody has, to at conferences and here. And I think it's just a really cool little activity to use. And I'm going to pass on while I create the artwork.
So one of the ideas that we center across the entire collection of books is the idea of forming what we call a beloved community in mathematics environments. And this community is really important from our youngest learners all the way down in pre-kindergarten to our learners in high school, as well as beyond. If you're someone who is an administrator or someone who is in higher education, you'll know that creating this community amongst teachers and pre-service teachers is important as well. And part of this process of creating beloved community involves first reflecting on your own teacher positionality, where you come from, your experiences, your beliefs and values, and what you bring into that mathematics space and are open to sharing with others. We ask to form beloved community. That part of that process includes learning about students as people, and specifically young thinkers who do engage with mathematics and who really do mathematics in the sense of experiencing mathematics in their world and in the classroom, and are able to contribute to mathematical discussions and mathematical thinking, who have really profound identities as mathematics learners. We ask you in the formation of beloved community to form math community and math commitments. What are people in your math environment committing to, and what are they contributing to in the classroom setting? What are kind of the expectations that you hold for one another? We ask that you engage students in mathematics community builders and icebreakers, so that students and teachers are getting to know each other in and beyond the classroom. And then also to have temperature checks built into your lessons, built into those daily routines that check on not just how students are progressing academically, but how are they progressing as people? How are they feeling in your math environment? Are there things that need to change or be modified to help foster those strong mathematics identities in our students? Oops. So in the middle school book, they highlight a few examples. You'll see the student information sheet and the math autobiography, and these are ideas that are elaborated on within the middle school version of the book. And it really involves teachers getting to know their students as learners in the classroom. You'll see 2 additional adaptations on the screen. One is an example of a heart map. And that's a way that in early elementary classrooms or upper elementary classrooms, students are able to get to know one another. Teachers are able to get to know students. We ask students to put into their heart maps things that they love, things that they value. And then as teachers, kind of any sharing in that dictation process where they're able to talk to students about what they put on their heart maps and why they chose that items. Similarly, you'll see an example of a puzzle piece. So talking about how in our beloved community, we're essential pieces and we all have to work together for the bigger picture. So again, using words, using images, but then the teacher talking through and talking with students about why they selected certain things to put on their puzzle piece and having that conversation. Ava, are you ready for me to refresh?
Yes, that was good timing.
All right. Give me one moment. Okay.
All right, so when you filled in the survey, one of the questions was, what is your role in education? And I just threw all the answers into a Wordle. So you can see, we see math teachers, assistant coaches, we see art, we see middle grades education, we see admin, we see all kinds of different things. So that's kind of really nice to see that we're a very diverse group today. Let's go to the next slide.
Oops, sorry.
It's okay. Here the question, what does teaching math for social justice mean to you? And here are the things that kind of came out. So I want to give you a chance to maybe just put in the chat what stands out from this Wordle for you. There's lots of things coming in. Access, equity, need, opportunity. I love the fact that the word use is pretty big. That seems to be a pattern that we get to see, which is nice to kind of have the activity part in here. Okay, so this is really nice. Thank you for sharing. Let's go to the last one. So this one was, what is an injustice that relates to your students where you work or live? And this one is a little bit harder, I think, to read because what comes out loud and clear is math, students, school, and many. And I think the more individual pieces are a little bit smaller, but we do see access here and injustice. So I think this one didn't do a great job summarizing this way. And I would probably in the next one delete these words and see what else would pop out. But I think that's it. Let's move on.
So next we wanted to answer the question, why math? I think for those of us who are already doing this work, we think, why not math? But I think that this is something that we might need to respond to our colleagues, to administrators, to family members. So there's lots of reasons why we might do this work in math, but we have a couple of reasons that we often center on. So the first one is we know that it builds mathematical literacy. So when we do this kind of work with children in pre-K to 8 and into high school, and even with our college students, We know when we bring in issues of social injustice, it broadens the curriculum and shows children the importance of developing their mathematical skills and practices. It gives a reason. It provides opportunities to engage in mathematical reasoning and sense making in contexts that matter and and in contexts that children have knowledge of. A second reason is that it supports children to learn to use mathematics as a tool for social change. A lot of times kids see math tasks and lessons that are not relevant in our curriculum. They get used to solving faking math exercises that prompt them to say, when will we ever use this, right? And so this kind of work allows students to see mathematics as a powerful tool that they can use to understand and analyze the world around them. Mathematics is a tool for social change. A third reason is that it empowers students as an agent of change. The lessons in these books center students as sense makers and active mathematics doers, which is something that mathematics teachers have been advocating for a long time. The lessons provide space and suggestions for ways for students to take the knowledge that they have and are learning through these lessons and to do something with it. And finally, it rehumanizes mathematics education. When we rethink the kinds of content and contexts we are bringing into the classroom, we have an opportunity to rehumanize mathematics for our students. So when our students see mathematics lessons that connect to issues that are 1, important and relevant, 2, that connect to social inequities and injustice, and 3, that provide opportunities for them to make sense of math and to act, it can rehumanize our classrooms. So some things that we hold as kind of non-negotiable ideas that I think are important to kind of put out on the table when we're thinking about this kind of work are the following. First, that we have to believe as math teachers that kids come into our classrooms as competent mathematical thinkers who come to us with important math knowledge. They're not just empty buckets that we're going to fill with math knowledge. They come to our classrooms with knowledge, with experiences, and with expertise that we need to connect to and build on. And we need to get to know their interests and their strengths and what they care about. Even just a simple activity like we just did, it's really important to get to know them these first couple of weeks of school so that we know what's important to them and to connect with them. The second thing is that children are capable of doing the intellectual work of problem solving. It's important to set up our math classrooms and our math lessons in ways that allow students an opportunity to be at the center of our inquiry. And it's our role to support them and not to do it for them. And I think all the lessons in our books are about that. They're starting with a launch that really asks kids, what do you know about this topic? How can we build on that knowledge? It's about getting different perspectives and getting non-dominant narratives out there. The third piece is that students care about fairness, equity, and justice. Some adults think that kids may not be ready to discuss these ideas related to injustice, especially young kids. And it's just not true. We have lots of research that show that young children come to school, come to preschools, come to elementary school, already thinking about fairness, equity, and justice. And we know that our society is rife with inequity and injustice. So by allowing children to engage in activities that explore these issues, teachers are acknowledging children's whole identities, as well as the relevance it has to schooling. The fourth idea is that teaching is non-neutral. From what and how we teach, teaching has always and will always be political. So every day we have to make decisions about what to include and what not to include in our classrooms. And by acknowledging this, we acknowledge the power and status that teachers have in our classrooms. And so we want teachers to do what they can to make our classrooms welcoming and inclusive and justice-oriented spaces. And we hope that these lessons will help you envision what that can look like in classrooms, in primary classrooms, in upper elementary classrooms, in middle school and high school. And finally, identity matters. It's important to acknowledge the multiple identities we all hold, from little kids to us as teachers, and how that impacts our classroom communities.
Thank you, Courtney, for that summary. And I've been watching that chat while listening and, thinking about identity, of how much people have shared where they're from and how long they've been teaching. And that's just fabulous. Thank you so much for sharing. We're going to jump into the Learning for Social Justice standards. Many of us, I think, are familiar with the math standards, and whether that's Common Core in the United States or other given math standards that we address with our math lessons. But this book series also pays attention to social justice standards. And there is a publication called Social Justice Standards that was published by Learning for Justice, and it's a framework for learning for justice, for anti-bias framework. It's a roadmap that for anti-bias education at every level of the K-12 instruction. So if we go to the next slide, there's anchor standards that are 4 anchor standards, and they're for K2, 3, 5, 6, 8, and 9, 12. Those are the grade levels. I know we have a bunch of international people on here. Those are the grade levels in the United States that are subdivided into. And they're giving specific standards of what you want to do at each of those grade levels. And there's 4 domains. And if we go to the next slide, we can see the 4 domains. So there's identity, which means relate how identity has many characteristics and affects relationships within and beyond the classroom. There's diversity, develop respectful ways to discuss similarities and differences with others and begin to think about how diversity affects relationships within the classroom and beyond. There's justice, understand the difference between personal stereotypes and systemic discrimination, explore how privilege impacts discrimination and justice. And there's action, move students from prejudice reduction to collective action. And I see that there's a link to the framework in the chat. And we want to say that all of the lessons in our book draw on both content standards and social justice standards. And back to you, Courtney.
Yeah, I wanted to mention too, we draw heavily on, we use Catherine Ye's work I just wanted to show this very quickly. Catherine Ye did some work for Learning for Justice to take these social justice standards that are, they have standards for K-12, and then they have grade level outcomes. They have K2 outcomes, 3-5 outcomes, 6-8, and 9-12, which are really great to think about your classroom as a whole. And then what Catherine Ye did was she looked at each domain within mathematics. So here's just a snapshot of what identity looks like in the context of math. And then Jen, if you go to the next slide, here's the diversity domain in the context of math. And so Catherine goes through each of the 4 domains within math. And so I'm going to put it in the chat, but all of these resources are at the resources page at Corwin, and also on the Learning for Justice site. So I'll put it in the chat in a moment so that you have access to it. But what's really helpful about both sites, the Learning for Justice, social justice standards are across the curriculum, but then what Catherine Ye did was really situate it within the context of mathematics to think of, by giving examples of what it looks like, but also places to reflect on your teaching about how you could strengthen these standards within mathematics.
So we're going to move on to the next part of our session, which is going to focus on adapting and creating math lessons for social justice. So you'll see here within the 4 books, early elementary, upper elementary, middle school, and high school, there are a total of 73 pre-designed lessons from classroom teachers, classroom coaches, other experts in mathematics and in teaching that you can use within your own classroom. And you'll see early elementary has 14 lessons, upper L has 15, middle school 22, and high school 22. So there's a variety of lessons that you can choose from, and we're going to talk a little bit about how you might select a lesson and adapt a lesson from the resources. You can adapt them across books, as Ava has shared in the chat as well. You'll see here is some of the lessons that we find in our early elementary book. And these are organized by, you'll see mathematics focus area, as well as a social justice topic that the lesson is addressing. You'll see these are some of the lessons from the upper elementary book. Again, focus area and social justice topic is included for you as you're thinking about what you're teaching. In middle school, we have lessons centered on the various classes that students would be taking. So here we have middle school number system and ratio and proportion lessons. Here's middle school lessons to cover algebra, statistics and probability and geometry. High school, again, is organized into number and quantity, algebra and functions, which you see here on the screen, stats and probability, geometry, and so what we have in all 4 of the books is a social justice mathematics lesson planner, and there's a lesson plan template. And you'll notice that part of the lesson plan template will include background as to the context of the classroom. What is the purpose? Who is the audience for this lesson? What is the timing like for this lesson? When is it occurring during the school year? What has happened before and what is going to happen after this particular lesson that makes it important that we're taking up both the mathematics and the social justice at this point in time? You'll see part of the lesson planner includes a space to think about content, both the mathematics goals for the lesson, the mathematics content domains and standards, as well as how the social justice component and social justice standards and domains are being addressed within the lesson, and what we hope the social justice outcome to be for our students. There's a space to think about who. So what are some of the resources that you might need to pull in to build your own knowledge of either the mathematics, the social justice, the issue or concern that you're working to address? What are some classroom practices and norms that need to be in place to make sure that students feel safe and you're maintaining that beloved community? How are you focusing this lesson around children recognizing injustice at the individual, institutional, and systemic levels? Thinking about when this is occurring, and are there possible interdisciplinary connections that you might have or you might be able to bring into this lesson? Is there relevant children's literature you could bring into your mathematics lesson? Is there a connection to something you're doing in science where you might center ideas around like environmental justice? And how is this going to look in your classroom? Is this going to be part of a routine? Or something that's happening on a daily basis, like in early elementary, we might have a calendar time or short mathematics chunks and routines, or is it something that's going to occur over a longer period of time, like a mathematics unit, or is it going to be part of a 3-act task or a notice wonder? You'll see within the second part of the lesson planning template, it really does follow that launch, explore, summarize framework that we see in mathematics, thinking about how we're launching and starting into the lesson. How are we engaging students, finding out what they know, getting them invested in both the mathematics and the justice? What is the teacher doing? What are the children doing? We move then into the exploration where students are becoming actively engaged in the mathematics. They're inquiring, they're using mathematics, they're really doing mathematics and taking that active role in their learning and in problem solving. And then the summarize where we're bringing it together, kind of wrapping up the math content, the social justice content, coming together as a community to share what we've learned and what we found out. You'll see 2 additional pieces at the bottom of the part 2 of the planning template. And these are really critical pieces. The first you'll see is taking action. And that really centers on this idea that as social justice learners, we need to take action. We need to figure out how are we going to share what we've learned? How are we going to use our knowledge then to move our community forward? And then the next piece being stakeholder communication. So we know that sometimes these topics can be difficult to communicate with families and communities. So how are we forward thinking about that? How are we communicating to families, to communities, even sometimes to our admins, that we're taking up this work, and what's that going to look like in our classroom and in our space? How are we communicating information on the lesson, about the lesson, but then also how are our children communicating their learning about the mathematics and the social justice pieces? So some questions we want to consider when we're planning social justice math lessons really center around this idea of context, content, who, when, and then holistically how. And Ava has put some resources in the chat for us. Thanks, Ava. But thinking about context, what are those issues that are important to children, families, and communities? So that goes back to all that work that you've done at the beginning and throughout the school year to build that beloved community, and thinking about what are the issues and concerns that your community has, and how can you start to mathematize those. Thinking about content, we always want to make sure that we're developing students' content knowledge. So thinking about how are we developing that content knowledge, building on those content standards, but empowering our children to see that the world is full of mathematics and that we can use math as a tool to understand their world. Thinking about who matters. How are we engaging children in exploring lived experiences that might pertain to themselves and might pertain to others? So thinking about windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors. We want to provide experiences that serve as windows where students can see the experiences of others, mirrors where they see the experiences of themselves, and then sliding glass doors where they are in and out of those experiences. When matters. How are we using these social justice math lessons to build on other social justice goals, other mathematics goals that we've had earlier in the school year or that we know are forthcoming later in the school year? So situating kind of your specific lesson within a broader landscape of mathematics and justice-centered teaching. So I'm going to share with you one of the lessons from the early elementary book that I wrote in conjunction with children in our Maple classroom at a preschool I was supporting. And so this was a lesson co-constructed with 4- and 5-year-olds. And we really wanted to center this idea of food insecurity, thinking about context, content, who, and when. Students in our classroom had been involved in a redesign of our playground, and part of that redesign included thinking about a community garden for our school to share. So as part of this conversation, we started exploring where community gardens were located in our community, who had access to those community gardens, and students became kind of enamored with the idea of like people sharing a garden space, what that looked like in our community, what was that gonna look like in our school, and like why would something like that be needed? So we started talking about this idea of food insecurity and what that meant and how it was impacting our community at large. So we centered on some social justice goals and standards around knowing about other people, other people's lived experiences. No one at our school currently, when this lesson took place, was food insecure. Students had access to 2 of their 3 meals at school, and we did have knowledge that no one in the school was food insecure outside of that. But really having the students kind of unpack this idea that 1 in 5 children in our community were food insecure. So thinking about what that meant and how could we as a classroom community of learners take action to kind of bring awareness to this topic for families, for other students, and think about a way to take action. So for our math standards, we were centered on this idea of counting sets and participating in sorting and data collection, what that would look like. A lot of ideas around like one-to-one correspondence with young children, but we did also use some really interesting visual representations to unpack the 1 to 5 proportion or ratio of children who are food insecure in our community. And ultimately what happened is we did some simulations around what it would be like to be food insecure, where students would roll a die, and depending on what they rolled, they would have to either count or use their knowledge of subitization to figure out if they were going to get some goldfish or not for a breakfast, lunch, or dinner experience. And so then they got to see what happened and how people were reacting when they were getting goldfish and others weren't. And we talked about what that meant and how they were feeling and why it was important for everyone to have access to food to eat in our community. So as part of our taking action component, at this point in time, students decided they wanted to write a letter to our local representatives. We had Skyped in with Feeding America Tampa Bay and talked to representatives there. And one of the things that our contact at Feeding America talked about was they were trying to encourage more representatives to come visit the area, visit the local food bank, and kind of see the need that existed. And so we wrote a letter to persuade our representative to come and visit the food bank and shared with them some of the things that we learned and how it felt to kind of have this experience within our community. And this was really, really fun. It was 4 and 5-year-olds, so they had a lot to share and a lot to say. We were able to integrate writing. We did some video chatting and Skyping with different organizations. We brought in some literature connections that are featured in the book. And it was just really, really exciting to see the students take up the mathematics, take up the justice issue, and then realize like they had a voice, they had something to say and something to share about a need that was happening in their community. So some ways that we adapted this work for working with both in-service and pre-service teachers, looking at our local community, spending time really thinking about what food stores did students have access to, thinking about replicating this idea, looking at play spaces, looking at libraries, gardens, or even green space in our local community, and where was that located, what was happening to some of the green space that had historically been there. Also thinking about having students ask questions or having even educators or future educators look at the data we're collecting around some of these things and thinking about what are we noticing and wondering, what data is missing, what is there an abundance of, and then thinking about how this data might compare to other districts we've been in, other schools we've been in, and how we could use this information in our planning through things like looking at community walks or community drives to gather some of that data and then reflecting on it as we're starting to plan experiences for young children in classrooms.
So I'm going to give a quick overview over a lesson that a bunch of us developed together, and Courtney, who is also on this webinar, and I were part of the team. We developed an early elementary and upper elementary and a middle school lesson out of this idea of what does our world look like if we shrank the world down to 100 people? What would it look like? And so you can see there's all kinds of different mathematics involved. So if we take a second and think about we're shrinking the population of the world proportionally down to 100, what could we learn about the world? And if you could just scan, and this QR code will work, and put your estimate in how many people out of the 100 would come from the US if the 100 represents the total world. Thank you for sharing that. And I see the answers coming in. Just share what your thoughts are at the moment. How many come from the US? All right, I'm going to count back from 10 and then we'll close the survey. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Excellent. And I'm going to put that into the slideshow. So if we can, hang on, I have to copy it in. If we can get a refresh right now and go to the next slide. So you can see the different answers here in the little mountains. And on average, we said 15 out of the 100 people would come from the US. Some people thought it was close to 0. Some people thought it was more. And so the reason we do this activity is because it's kind of nice to check where your knowledge is before you learn a fact. And then you can kind of talk about, we learned it. We want to make sure that we don't talk about, you don't have to get this right, because you don't need to know everything when you come in my class. So if we go to the next slide, we can see a representation. We usually either use the internet or a book called If the World Were a Village. There's all kinds of videos, there's different resources, and we lay them out in the lessons. And we see that there's 4 out of the 100 people would come from the US and 5 from the US and Canada. So now we get to check with our prediction. What was our prediction and where are we at? So the slide we're sharing here has a breakdown by almost continents, not quite. And the math we're seeing here is connecting across different visual representations. So we talk about why might one use a table versus a pie chart versus a hundreds chart versus a bar graph. What helps you compare the different parts to each other versus what helps you understand their relation to the whole. And so we learn about the world while we're also learning about graphing or other mathematics. And if we go to the next slide, and I'm super excited that we have people from all over the world here, is that there isn't one way to cut the Earth into continents. There's actually multiple ways, and depending on where you grow up, you either learned there was 4 continents, 5, 6, or 7, and there are different ways of breaking it up. And so we talk about this is like the critical literacy, right? Like, so how do we count these, and how do we decide where somebody's from? And we bring in the social aspects in addition to the mathematics. There's lots of other topics in the book or on the web, like health, religion, all kinds of things, food insecurity. If we want to come back to the prior example, we can look at food insecurity all around. So let's go to the next slide. So just some images of what this might look like in an elementary school classroom. And in this one, we happen to put a map on the floor. You can debate whether this map is an accurate or inaccurate representation, right? We talk a lot about maps and how they were designed. And this one happens to not center around the United States. So that's also an interesting way if you are going to school in the United States. But anyway, there's all kinds of different ways that you can make this task come alive by, experiencing the tallness of how many people come from Asia versus how few people come from the United States. So let's go to the next slide. So adapting this lesson. So if the world were 100 people, where would they come from? We can adapt this context. So one thing we do, there is a book called If America Was a Village, and I think it deals with the United States. So if the United States were a village, what would that look like? And then we often go down to, I live in Portland. What if Portland was a village? And then we compare, what does the village of Portland of 100 people look like to the village of the world? And, more people speak English and those kinds of things. You can, even for your school, say that. And then adapting content, we can do percentages, we can do fractions, we can do decimals. I've done exponential growth. So you can adapt the content as well. And I'm going to pass on to Tonya.
All right, thank you. Wow, this time just is flying by. So I'm going to talk a little bit about ways that you can connect with others and the importance of connecting with others in this work. Excuse me, I have a bit of a cough. So one theme that really comes up repeatedly in research on teaching math for social justice, as well as from the contributors of our book, is just really the importance of engaging and finding a community of justice-oriented educators and activists that you can connect with for support. And there are lots of communities that you might connect with. Might be your local community or a local activist group, colleagues in your building, teachers you meet at conferences, educators you meet online, supportive friend groups that support you in personal ways, and hopefully even some connections from this webinar. And these groups can really be invaluable in helping you identify resources and select and design lessons that work for and matter to your specific students. One elementary teacher shared this advice: get to know the community and create bonds with people. Learn the stories of others so that you can find ways to support them. Another teacher that was a contributor to our books really reflected on the importance of cultivating partnerships with families. They say, from day one of school, I connect to my students' families through family surveys, in-person conferences, or home visits. I build this relationship throughout the year. I'm a partner with my students' parents, guardians. Because of these strong relationships, I believe I have fewer challenges. When challenges do arise, I can easily reach out to my students' families. And community can also really help you deepen your own thinking, or help us deepen our own thinking about social justice topics in the world and about how students will approach them. So we just really encourage you to build a supportive network of friends and colleagues to do this work. And so we share one more quote from a teacher in the book who says, I surround myself with a community of educators, organizers, professors, and people who love me as I was, as I am, and as I will be. I remember that this work is intergenerational and that I'm just doing my part with the time I am allotted to daily try to cause less harm than I did the day before. And naps. I take lots of naps unapologetically. So really, each of us has a role to play. And Jen, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. Each of us has a role to play in shaping the future of the math ed community. And we can connect with others who embrace teaching math for social justice, who are using social justice math lessons in their classrooms. We can learn and share together. So we do invite you to connect with us. We have a Facebook group, Math Lessons to Explore Social Injustice. You can also connect on Twitter at Social SJ Mathematics. And we are also creating a Google Doc that we will share with folks that shared their email addresses in that initial query, so that if you are okay with being a part of a group, we will share that Google Doc with you. And then that will be a space where you can connect and ask questions. So thank you all so very much. We do have a little bit of time for questions that you might have before Corwin wraps it up and does their book giveaway. For those of you that are asking about maybe being added to the Google Doc, if you want to just send me a message in the chat personally rather than to everyone, just send it to Tonya Bartell. I'll take note of your email addresses when I save the chat so that you're included. There's a request, Jen, to see if we can go back one slide.
I also saw a question about the certificate of attendance, and we will be sending an email out in the next couple of days with the recording of the webinar as well as the certificate of attendance.
I also see a question about how we might conceptualize similarly or differently social justice versus culturally relevant mathematics. And I can answer personally. I don't know that this is necessarily shared by all of the other book authors, but my conceptions of culturally relevant math instruction come from the work of Dr. Gloria Latson-Billings. And in her work, one of the key strands of cultural relevance in classrooms or culturally relevant pedagogy is developing a critical consciousness together with and for students. And so I do see that as actually explicitly aligned with how we think about working toward justice in our classrooms.
Yeah, I agree. I think we draw a lot on her work and similar work to that, where and the idea that we acknowledge and honor the identities of children when they walk through our door, and really try to understand those identities and honor them.
I'm seeing a couple of other questions about the length of the lessons, as well as connecting to like existing curriculum. I can speak for the upper elementary book. Many of the lessons are more than one day in length, and yet at the same time, we've had a lot of teachers adapt them to be one day in length or to fit the time that they have. And one of the ways that they connect to their existing math curriculum is they look at the math goals that they are trying to meet with their students, and then look to the social justice books for lessons that engage in similar math goals.
Yeah, I would say it's very similar for the early elementary. They range in grain size. So some of them could be done in a day, and some of them are done over a week or two. And some of them, I don't think any of us really thought a teacher would pick it up. I mean, in the lessons, you could pick it up and follow it as a script, because it is kind of scripted out so that teachers could kind of visualize or envision what it would look like. But it's all, we scripted it out so that you could envision it, so that you could take it off and make it your own. And so there's one lesson in the early elementary book, and maybe the upper elementary book too, about 10 fingers, and how it's a very common lesson in books about counting by tens. And it really cues teachers to think about how not every person is born with 10 fingers or has 10 fingers. And just the other day, when I was in my third grade classroom, and we did a lesson about, we're studying multiplication and division, there were a collection of problems about number of legs with cats and number of legs with insects. And right away, I was like, okay, so if there's 3 cats in the yard, well, if we're going to solve problems about cats, what does this assume about cats, right? And so the kids were like, oh yeah, not every cat has 4 legs. I have a cat that's named Tripod, right? And so that was a carryover from our initial discussion or earlier in the year, where we talked about how sometimes bodies are different. Not everybody has 10 fingers. And so it was really nice that the kids connected that back and brought in their real life experiences about not every cat body is the same. And so my point is that these lessons aren't necessarily like you'll pick up this lesson and teach it as is, but it's kind of like a way of teaching, or a kind of a philosophy, or kind of a critical take on teaching math.
That's a great way to close. We'll turn it over to Corwin.
And a big thank you to Tonya, Courtney, Jennifer, and Ava for that very important and informative presentation this evening. Thank you, everyone.